So GPER G-1 is developing a novel therapeutic for treating diabetes and obesity. The compound that we've licensed and the target that we've licensed from the University of New Mexico is essentially in the pre-IND stage. It means that we're just doing the preliminary research on the compound's toxicity and bioavailability in order to assess whether it can be used as a drug. Of course, all of the testing for its efficacy in diabetes and obesity is done. One very important point, which I'll come back to, is that the same compound and target is already in phase 1 clinical trials for oncology. The work that we're licensing is over 15 years of effort by Dr. Eric Prosnitz at the University of New Mexico. We were founded in 2018 specifically to commercialize this technology through the New Mexico Startup Factory. We've had about $200,000 in angel funding, of which about half is a matching grant from the UNM Rainforest Innovation Fund. And then we're spending the $300,000 phase 1 STTR, which is a non-dilutive grant. I've been an entrepreneur in northern New Mexico for longer than I really should have been, about 25 or 30 years. Dr. Prosnitz is the lead inventor. He's serving on our as our chief scientist at the University of New Mexico. John Chavez is a co-founder and the CFO. Andrea Garcia is a co-founder and the COO. The need that we're targeting is for treating the metabolic disorders associated with obesity, primarily diabetes. And this is a huge problem, especially in the first world. There's 1.5 million or more cases of diabetes diagnosed annually. There's 250,000 deaths that list diabetes as an underlying cause. And it has a huge direct and indirect cost to society. The market opportunity for diabetes treatments and drugs is large at $50 billion last year and growing fairly quickly. It's expected to be $78 billion by 2026. And it's fairly consolidated. 3 companies have more than half the market share of treatments and therapeutics for diabetes. Of course, the major treatment is insulin, but there are some drugs and other treatments out there as well. The drugs are like insulin, fairly inconvenient because they need to be injected usually, and they have really bad side effects. So there really is still a huge unmet need for something that's safe and effective, orally available and easy to take with few side effects. And that's what we believe we have in G1, which we've trademarked as Tezspira, which is a first-in-class molecule that targets a new receptor, the GPER, the G-coupled protein estrogen receptor that was discovered at the University of New Mexico. What we found is that G1 targeting this receptor increases the energy expenditure of the animals that we've tested it in without changing their activity level or their diet, which means that they burn more calories and they don't get hyperactive and they don't eat more. The receptor itself is a novel pathway, and this is why this is a first-in-class drug. The receptor has been shown to maintain blood glucose levels and lipid homeostasis and improve insulin tolerance. The way that they showed this most profoundly was they took some mice and they genetically engineered them to knock out this receptor. And in all cases, the knockout mice had less glucose tolerance and poorer insulin tolerance than the wild type mice. The way that this works is through an estrogen receptor that is not the normal estrogen receptor. So people have known for quite some time that estrogen has a beneficial effect on glucose and lipid metabolism, and in fact was useful against diabetes. The problem, of course, is you can't use estrogen to treat diabetes because it has a reproductive and feminizing effect. What they discovered at the University of New Mexico is this new receptor. And the receptor acts with estrogen, but it is not the feminizing and reproductive receptor. So the challenge then became, can we find a receptor? Can we find a compound that only hits this new estrogen receptor and does not hit the well-known estrogen receptors that are involved in the reproductive and feminizing effects? And so that's what G1 is. G1 is a compound that selectively agonizes the GPER receptor without docking with or interacting with the traditional estrogen receptor. And so we see that it has the effects on the metabolic processes involved in glucose and lipid metabolism, and it does not have any effect on the reproductive and the feminizing pathways. This has been well demonstrated that it can be used to treat obesity by basically making mice fat and then making them skinny again by treating them with G1. And you can make them fat by taking out their ovaries, thereby emulating a sort of a menopause model, or just feeding them high-fat diet, which is the way I make myself fat. And then with G1, they get skinny again. There's lots of data on this that shows that after making them fat, if you treat them with G1, you improve the glucose tolerance, restore the insulin sensitivity, increase energy expenditure. And it has a number of other beneficial effects, particularly while we're focusing on obesity. As a side effect of diabetes, there are problems with fatty liver disease and inflammation that this may also be useful for. Lots and lots of data has been published. Early last year, it was summarized in a very prestigious publication in Science Translational Medicine. The reason that we believe this is revolutionary is because it is treating a new pathway. So all of the existing treatments and drugs target well-known pathways. This is a new pathway, and so there's a potential of being able to hit this pathway and cause this treatment to happen without the side effects that are associated with interfering with the other known pathways. What we believe that this is doing is it's targeting brown fat. Now, brown fat is something that all infants are born with. They burn, brown fat actually burns a lot of energy and generates heat to keep infants warm, but then it becomes dormant, inactive in adults. And it's actually been a holy grail to reactivate brown fat and burn energy as a weight loss. So that's how we believe it's working. And again, the target is unique. We have a broad and deep intellectual property portfolio. We have licensed the patents on the compounds that have been discovered that bind to this receptor. And then we've also have method patents on interfering with the metabolic pathways through the GPER receptor. So even if these compounds aren't the last word in drugs, we have the patents on exploiting this pathway for metabolic disorders. And then we're building our own intellectual property portfolio. We've, for example, trademarked Tespira as the trade name for G1, that first compound. Now, the interesting thing about this opportunity is that G1 has already been licensed by another biotech company as a co-therapeutic, as a cofactor treatment for cancer. Now, anybody that's been unfortunate enough to have breast cancer or know somebody that has may know that they've been advised to avoid soy milk or any estrogen, because estrogen has a protective effect against some kinds of cancer. What this company has done is they've recognized that G1 may knock down the protective effect of estrogen and thereby make other chemotherapies more effective. And they, in fact, have got patients enrolled for more than a year now in clinical trials, which means that their process of getting G1 to a drug is way ahead of ours. And that's great for us because that means that we know that G1 is going to make it through all of the preclinical testing because it's already been through the preclinical testing once. And the FDA is already familiar with this compound. So we believe a very low risk drug development company because we're essentially following this other company in these tests. Now, of course, the tests aren't identical because cancer is not the same endpoint as obesity and diabetes, but it does give us a very high degree of confidence that we can succeed in the preclinical and in the first clinical phases because they already have.
John, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, so we are running our studies on the $300,000 STTR. We expect that's just basically showing that we can manufacture it and conduct the additional tests. Again, low risk that these tests will fail. After this, we expect to raise $3.8 million. Part of that will be a phase 2 STTR, and that will get us to the pre-IND meeting with the FDA. Now, the pre-IND meeting is basically where you lay out what you've got and the fact that you want an initial new drug approval from the FDA, and then they talk to you about what additional data they're going to want to see. So we should be able to get with another 3.8 million all the way to the pre-IND meeting. Also invest more money in licensing and intellectual property. This is a fairly straightforward process. It's easy to make this compound. It is orally available. That's how they're using it now. It's known to be have a low toxicity. And we are talking to all of the companies in this market. We actually have an agreement with one company, and they're testing G1 alongside us already, and we're talking to everybody else. The end.
All right, thank you. Any questions, Andrew and Ben?
Absolutely. This is Ben with Innovate Ventures. So after you get your 3.8 million, get to pre-IND, when are you thinking about exiting the business? How far do you want to take it to market?
We don't want to take it very far. Our exit plan, our liquidity plan is to license or sell the opportunity to a company that's already got a market presence or would like a market presence in this space, and of course has the whole pharmaceutical industry capability of manufacturing, selling, and supporting this compound.
Okay.
So an early exit for sure.
Yeah, good.
And have you guys identified any of those particular companies that would be likely acquirers?
Yeah, of course, because we're in discussions and even have an existing agreement, I can't tell you who they are. But we do have a company that is excited enough to be receive some of the compound and is running tests alongside our STTR funded work. And that gives us a lot of confidence in getting a phase 2 SBIR, because we're getting a lot more work done than you would expect with just the money we have. And then we're talking to everybody else. We've been in contact with most of the pharmaceutical companies that are in this area or want to be in this area, and we're in various stages of discussion with them as well. We've hired a company, a consulting group that specializes in forming partnerships with early stage drug companies and more mature pharmaceutical companies, Decennium partners. And they've helped us not only with the introductions, but structure the agreements so that they're fair to all concerned.
Are you doing the regulatory process internally, or are you using an outside source?
We're using outside consultants in all cases.
Good.
Mm-hmm. And now, I know you guys are looking to exit early, but, if things were to change or you guys decided to go longer term and look at the long-term opportunity, what would the timeline of that be to get something fully through the FDA and start commercializing? And, what would the likely costs be for something like that?
So that's a good question. It would cost a great deal of money. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars and 3 to 5 years to actually get a drug on the market. So there would be a number of rounds of fundraising ahead of us to do that. And of course, in each round of fundraising, there would be less risk because the compound would have made it further along the process. One of the things that's interesting about G1, which makes it especially attractive as an early exit to another pharmaceutical company, is the idea of using it as a cofactor for another drug. Increasingly, pharmaceutical companies are looking at multiple drug combinations to cause the effect that they're after. That, in fact, is what the company that's working with us now is investigating. And that would be beyond our means as a startup company to explore all of the multiple drug combination opportunities out there. So yes, we could pursue it alone, and of course we will, as long as it still looks good. We will continue to raise money and invest it in making this a more valuable opportunity. But we're going to do that as a standalone compound, and we'd be very eager to maybe even do both, pursue it as a standalone compound and introduce it as a cofactor in a partnership.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I don't have another question, but I hope you're successful. This is a huge problem, and hopefully you take a big chunk out of that problem.
Yeah, obesity is near and dear to my heart.
Yep.
We can package it with Dunkin' Donuts and have a great.
Very good.